the conveners of this important conference for giving me the privilege to participate and to offer my take on Rabbi Zach's Torah legacy. I titled my talk, Rabbi Zach's Torah from a Feminist Lens, but when I prepared it, I realized that it would be more accurate to refer to it as some kind of a feminist reading of Rabbi Zach's Torah. And I should start with an apology, although this is really almost a sin mideoraita to start a lecture with an apology. But I do feel that I have to apologize that I'm really no expert on Rabbi Zach's writings, doings, Torah, legacy, but I am a great admirer of him. And when I was approached to offer this particular perspective from, maybe I can call it from a woman's perspective, from a feminist perspective, I was really very happy to take this challenge upon myself and see what I can come up with. And I have to admit that with the help of my very able research assistant who is sitting here, Shoshana, I really discovered some very interesting things. And I was also privileged to talk with Miriam and to understand that this particular angle was not really dealt with so far. So maybe with all modesty, maybe I could contribute something interesting to this conference. So I think that if one were to ask how Rabbi Zach's writings and Torah and thoughts and machshava, how it could be taken from a feminist perspective, we should first divide between the halachic level and the philosophical level. On the halachic level, the questions are quite simple, right? The way to deal with it is to ask what was Rabbi Zach's halachic approach to issues that are clearly gendered, such as the differential religious obligations, mitzvot aseh she'azman graman, tor nashim mitzvot aseh she'azman graman, etc., etc., and obviously more so, all the halachic rules that are clearly discriminatory against women. So what was the Rav's position with respect to those specific predicaments of Jewish women, primarily in the area of divorce, which is one of the areas that I specialize with, particularly the issue of mesoratot get and agunot. So that's on the halachic level. And then on the philosophical level, there is this huge breadth of Rav's philosophical writings spread over countless books, drashot. We have this counter outside the conference room, which contains only some of Rabbi Zach's books, drashot, articles, from which we can try to assess his take on women and men, on gender roles, gender differences, feminism, and particularly on Jewish feminism. So how to go about it? And this is actually not the only division that, if we want to take this challenge systemically, analytically, there are more divisions within these two directions. Because on the halachic level, maybe we should make a difference. We should differentiate it. We should examine differently the writings of Rabbi Zach and the doings of Rabbi Zach as a leader and as the chief rabbi of Britain. And on the philosophical level, there as well, I would suggest, and I would actually want to focus on that we should differentiate between explicit writings and then what Rabbi Zach did not write about. Those areas where he perhaps left unattended and unexamined. perhaps I would suggest to refer to as silences. Now, so I want to address first, few minutes, the level of the Rav Sachs as an halachic leader. And here I'm very grateful to Rabbi Dr. Ruth Halperin-Kaddari, who was really very generous in sharing with me his own rich knowledge of Rabbi Sachs. And I really want to repeat the maybe explanation that Rav Halperin offered when maybe superficial, but not that superficial, examination of Rabbi Sachs' halachic writings reveals that he did not explicitly address those areas in which I myself, as a feminist, as a religious feminist, whatever that means, and this is not the subject of this specific presentation, so I would have expected him as such a prominent leader, as the chief rabbi of one of the largest Jewish communities in the world, to take a firm position on the issue of agunot, of mesorabot get, to go into the halachic predicament there and to confront the blatant discrimination against women in these areas, and there is no such writing by Harav Sachs on these particular areas. And so here I go to what Halperin explained, that we do need, of course, to take into consideration the very delicate position in which Rav Sachs was in terms of his role vis-a-vis the Jewish community in the UK. And as a pragmatist, he preferred to do a lot in these areas, realizing that it would be, or believing that it would be more effective to work through education and not through exerting political power over the community. So, on the one hand, he edited the Women's Review, which contained a very, in my reading, a very harsh critique of problems relating to the position of women within Judaism, but then he did not continue to act on this review. But whenever there were cases of agunot, of mesorabot get, he did exert all his power to provide specific solutions to save these individual women, including through channeling resources to track down men who were recalcitrant husbands, and so on and so forth. But then also on the halachic level, there were some areas which we could attribute a more kind of egalitarian approach in his writings. And one such example is the ceremony of Simchat Habat, which he authored and became a standard text in the Orthodox Siddur, and obviously his encouragement for women to study Torah. And perhaps a more telling indication of his position with regards to women's position and to gender equality in Judaism is his decision, on which he writes about, he elaborates on that in the book of the Great Partnership, to say Birkat HaTov HaMeitiv when a daughter is born. And to take this as a prime example, as a prototype of a chidush of a legitimate chidush within Jewish halacha. So this is a very interesting example, really fascinating, and I don't want to go more deeply into that because I want to reach the philosophical writings, but it's really fascinating to see how he analyzes this based on his own rabbi, Rabbi, in deciding to take this blessing, but then to stop with this chidush on the verge of conservative approach, which might have taken this one step further and supporting smicha, ordination of women as rabbis. But I'll stop here with respect to the halachic level, and I want to go to examine the philosophical writings. And here again, it's a question of where to start. So, as I said, as an admirer of Rabbi Sachs, I first went to his collection of the drashot, of the sermons of Parashot HaShavua, and also to his parshanut on the Haggadah of Pesach. And it appears that the only place, the only drasha where he directly confronts gender and begins the sermon by actually explicitly asking about gender differences is Parashat Bamidbar, where he goes through linguistic and etymological roots of the differences between banim and banot. He talks about the mifkad, the census of Bnei Israel, and he distinctly makes these distinctions between ben, a son, and bat, a daughter, or a girl and a boy, to establish gender psychological differences and gender roles. And then he supports these observations by looking at contemporary psychological research and very, I would almost say naturally, concludes with presenting Carol Gilligan's approach to gender differences. And here we should make a pause for a moment and give a very, very short sketch of contemporary feminist streams of thought to present Carol Gilligan's approach of a different voice, talking about or confirming differences between men and women in terms of moral thinking, of moral thoughts. Men think in a way of rights, and women's morality is different. Women think in terms of relationships, and women make moral decisions based on relational considerations. So this is sometimes referred to as the difference feminism, or the feminism or cultural relational feminism, and this is usually presented in opposition to the more quote-unquote traditional feminism, or the early feminism of the 60s, which is equality feminism, which is the feminist thoughts that argues with attributing differences and with attributing gender differences. And it's really not surprising that we could ascertain maybe sympathy in Rabbi Sachs' writing with and identifying himself with the approach presented by Carol Gilligan that confirms gender differences. However, if we were to take Carol Gilligan's approach until the end, she advocates that these differences should not determine the power relations between men and women. And she actually advocates for an androgynous model, saying that women should embrace those attributes that are usually characterized with men, and men could and should embrace those characteristics which are usually attributed to women. And Rabbi Sachs, when he presents her theory and concludes in that particular sermon of Bamidbar, does not reach that conclusion. Now, I know that my time is almost up, so I want to say a few things about the book of Breshit, the whole book of Breshit, which is actually the obvious place to look at if we were to see what Rabbi Sachs thought about women and men, because this is a book about relationships, right? This is a book about familial relationships, whether it is about couples, whether it is parents and children, whether it is about children's relations themselves, and adopting a feminist approach would mean that myself, I would read this book and look for the hidden voices, the unheard female, women's voices within those stories of Breshit. And if I read Rabbi Sachs' reading of the Torah, this is what I'm looking for. And unfortunately, I did not see this in the story of the creation, Adam v'Chava, in Parashat Breshit, and also in the book of the Great Partnership. There's a beautiful interpretation of the story of the creation, contradicting the usual narration of this story within the Christian legacy of the original sin. It really offers a beautiful way to look at this, the construction of the relationship between Adam and Eve. But there is no attempt to go into Chava's own feelings, understandings, thoughts, what actually drove her to contradict God's directive not to eat from the forbidden fruit, what made her, contrary to usual perception of gender roles, what made her the initiator of this whole story. And we could contrast this with other interpretations of the book of Breshit, of the story of the creation. For example, Professor Ilana Pardes, wonderful book of Habri'ah Lefi Chava, and I don't have time to do this comparison, but this really goes on in all the other stories of Breshit, of Sarah and the Akedah. I mean, isn't this where it really begs to talk just a little bit about what Sarah felt when she wakes up in the morning and she sees her husband and her only child gone missing, and then, I mean, we all know the very famous drasha of Sarah's death, right when she heard what actually happened. So this is another lacuna, another silence. Then there's the relationship of Rachel and Leah, and Rabbi Sachs does talk about the pasuk of Yaakov ahav et Rachel yoter mileah. So again, it begs to examine, to observe, to just talk a little bit about what Leah must have felt in these relationships. And I could go on and on in offering this kind of really limited and very, very careful critique that could come from a feminist attempt to find out those unheard and hidden voices, predicaments, feelings, interests of women within the Torah, within the Halakha, within the Jewish tradition, and in Rabbi Sachs' writing. And I just want to conclude by saying that I really don't want this to be taken as a negative critique of Rabbi Zach's legacy, but I want to offer this as with a question mark. How can this be explained? That this great, with this huge, really prime example of a Jewish leader and philosopher with such sensitivity, with such a humanistic approach of humanism, how come there is these maybe blind spots in his writings, in his philosophy, in relation to women? And my answer would be that it is a generational thing. If what we are witnessing now, and now I refer to a conference that we had at the Reckman Center just yesterday, a conference about women's participation in the halakhic process and women as poscot halakha, as halakhic deciders. We talked about the Batei Midrash and also about the mixed Batei Midrash, about the way that viewing the halakha, studying the Torah changes when men study them with women and are able to hear what women think, what women reflect, how women observe those texts that had been written and studied and taken upon by men only. And I really believe that if the late Rabbi Zach had the opportunity to do this exercise, maybe these writings and this philosophy would take a somewhat different angle. Thank you very much.